Up next, we've got Luísa Pinto, and she's going to be doing a talk on micro frontends. Thanks, Luisa.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to share my screen. So today I'm going to talk about micro frontends. And just before we start, I'm just going to introduce myself. My name is Luisa. As you may have realized, I'm a software engineer. I'm also an award-winning researcher, but I still don't know very well how. And I really like to tell everybody that I'm always learning, and I know very little about micro frontends, but I hope you enjoy the talk. So you can find me at LinkedIn at Luísa Pinto. Please connect. So what's a micro frontend? A micro frontend is an architecture, and the purpose of a micro frontend is to divide a large application into small and independent micro applications. This is a new and trendy architecture that is inspired in microservices. So before we continuing, I'm just going to define some terminology so that when I'm talking, you don't stay wondering what am I talking about. So basically, a master or a container is the application that sits in the top and coordinates when the other parts of the larger application are going to be active. So those parts of the bigger application, we call them sub-apps or micro apps or models. And when we put those applications together, we call this integration. So why do we use micro frontends? So the motivation for this has really three dimensions. So if we think about our apps, how they are built, we would like to scale them. But if we have an application, a big micro frontend that's all one application, that becomes really difficult. So that's why we want to separate these big applications, big frontends, into smaller applications that we can then integrate and distribute. This obviously accelerates the development. And in terms of the teams, we end up with teams that don't step on each other's toes and they have more freedom. For example, if you have a big application with a shopping list and a cart, maybe the cart could be built in Vue and the shopping list in React, and you can take advantage of the best skills of each team. You don't really need to stick to one. And then also say that React disappears and is no longer a good application, a good framework, then you can change. It's easier. So because of all of these advantages, you can also have continuous delivery, less downtime. It's easier to deploy because applications are smaller. They're smaller to test. It's easier to add features. You can think another advantages. There's really a lot of them. So there's obviously concerns when we use a micro frontend application. One of the concerns is scope. So if you have different sub-applications, each of them have their CSS styles, for example. And if two teams don't communicate and they decide to name the same class to a certain element in the HTML, then they can actually clash with each other. So you do need to implement scope. So fortunately, you can do that with less, with size, with namespaces, or with some prefix CSS libraries, like Material UI allows you to do that, for example. So if you don't do that, you will end with what's called cross-page contamination. Another concern is state. One of the requirements for micro frontends is that your applications shouldn't communicate with each other. They shouldn't be independent. Well, if they are independent, you shouldn't be sharing states between them. So you really need to think how you're going to divide your big micro frontend so that you don't end up by violating the requirements of micro frontends. So complexity, of course, it's harder to put a micro frontend together in terms of the setup. You have to set up more repos, you have different teams, pipelines, different servers, but at the end, it pays off, hopefully. There's obviously learning challenges, but I think it's really worth it. So I spoke to you about integration in one of the previous slides. And when we're talking about integration in micro frontends, we're talking about how the applications are going to be put together. So the most straightforward way would be to deploy the maps packages in NPM, for example. That's what you have been doing probably if you work in web development. You install a package, and then when you build your application, the JS from those packages is all brought up together into a JS file. That obviously has disadvantages. First of all, each time one of those packages is updated, you have to redeploy your application, the container and the package. And also, you end up with a big JS file, and you don't want that because you want your JS files to be small so you can load easily them in fast in the browser. So another type of integration is runtime. That basically means you're going to host your applications, your sub-applications, your micro applications as individual applications, standalone applications. And then at runtime, your container application knows how to go and get the JS that it needs, the CSS for those micro applications. And then there is server time integration as well. That's costly, and it's probably not the way you want to go. So when to use a micro frontend? So if you have several teams that are stepping on each other's toes and you want to maximize production, the productivity, then definitely have a look at micro frontends. If your front end is big, it's slow to load, and it has a lot of different components, and each time you're deploying those components, it means that you have to redeploy all the application. There's build time and all those metrics involved. Definitely, you might be need to decompose your application into micro applications. That's the same as having a monolithic, for example. And you have different features that you can separate. For example, authentication and a landing page or a marketing page or a dashboard. They don't have to communicate to each other. And there is no real need to deploy all of them each time you make change in one of them. You need to find out how your applications will communicate. This is a concern. So, and your workflow, are you going to use a build time, integration time? What's best for your team, and how you're going to handle scope? So if you want to have a look at micro frontend frameworks, I would point you first to have a go and learn it with Webpack Model Federation. And that's because it gives you a lot of control. You really decide which models to export, which models you make available, and which models you want to import. And you have to do everything by hand, but you will actually learn the most of it. But if you want to start faster and just understand what the concept is, Single Spy is a really nice framework application which uses runtime integration. And it's pretty much a router, like browser router if you worked with React. But it's specific for micro frontends. If you want a very, very opinionated framework, have a look at Luigi. They have solutions for authentication, authorization, rollout, and even UI components. And if you want to go for a component-based approach, where you just export your components and you integrate your components, then have a look at Bit. They have a cloud where the teams can deploy their components, and actually it helps managing versioning. It's really nice. So I just want to say thank you for your attention, and I hope you have learned something out of this presentation. And if you have any questions, please throw them to me.
Thanks, Luisa. That was a brilliant talk. Really good. We've got a few questions here as well, if you're okay to answer them. So the first one is, if one of the micro front-end apps stops working or broke during deploy, would the rest be able to work? Would that part just not display? So I think that's just somebody just looking to whether that's going to break everything if one part breaks.
No, it doesn't. So usually, well, if it's properly done, usually you have a bootstrap step, and a mount and then a mount step. And when you bootstrap, you actually use the bootstrap function. And if that application doesn't bootstraps, then you can handle the error as you like. And also, like if the mount function fails, you can also decide what to do with it. So your container will know how to mount the application. And if that application doesn't mount, you might decide not to show the application, show an error. It's really entirely up to you.
So the frameworks allow you to be quite resilient with what you're doing. You can have a lot of error handling in there, and there's a lot of segregation. So one thing breaking doesn't impact on the other necessarily.
Not necessarily, no. That's really the purpose, is to maximize continuous delivery, and all your teams can work and they don't break each other's. Yeah.
Brilliant. Next question we've got is, you mentioned you're new to Micro Frontends. Was there any resources you found particularly useful to help learn it? So how did you get started, really?
I will point you to a Udemy course, or I think the name of the author is Stephen Grinder. It's really, really good. It's the bestseller course in Udemy, and it taught me a lot.
Brilliant. Yeah, we can share those links, I think, when we share the recordings out.
Yes, of course. I can share the resources, yeah.
Brilliant. The next question down is, great talk, Luisa. Finally understand Micro Frontends. Would you see different teams owning different parts of the, of an SPA in an organization? So would you have that distributed through teams for the different parts of that?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I'll go through again because it might have been the way I delivered that as well. So, finally understand Micro Frontends. Would you see different teams owning different parts of an SPA in an organization? And if you want to just contribute in the chat, if you want to just go a little bit further with your question, happy to read that out now as well.
Yeah, definitely. I would see, for example, say you have a website and you have some advertising on your website, and you have your marketing team deciding which adverts will display and how the advert panel is going to look. The team that's taking care about authentication, or security team, they don't necessarily need to be worried about that. So they can perfectly both work in those two components separately. So I could give you another example. For example, if you have a website which has a product list, why should it stop the shopping cart from working? And if you're deploying the shopping cart, why should the product list have to go in, stop working too? So I totally see them different teams with different roles and responsibilities, but ultimately it depends on the business requirements.
So yeah, it's a really good tool then to separate those concerns and be able to move those between teams. It gives you a few more options by the sounds of it, which is really good. Yep. Next question is, isn't the master application going to be very heavy if built with React and Vue sub-applications, because we need to download both libraries to the client? So they're just asking, does it make it more heavyweight by having this Micro Frontends infrastructure?
No, actually, one concept I didn't talk about is lazy loading. So basically, you're just gonna load what you need for that particular screen, for what's in the screen. So you're not gonna load all different applications at once.
So can they share those dependencies? So if you've got two different parts of two different Micro Frontends, can they share that dependency in the client so they're not
yes,
wasting memory?
Micro Frontends can also share dependencies. If you're working with model federation, for example, you can configure your Webpack to do that. And you can even lock to a certain dependency, saying, for example, I only want to share the dependency if it is a React version, whatever. And I don't want to, if it's not this version, I don't want to share. So, yeah.
And then final question we've got is, can you have multiple Micro Frontends rendered on the same page, or are they separated by a URL path? So
yes, that's how the runtime integration works. When you navigate to a certain path, your container app is going to look at the path and decide what will mount, what will render on that page, which applications, and then they have a mount function, and
So that's how you can do, like, you could have a whole different dashboard with different components on, for something like that, for example, or any app where you've got multi-components. Each one of those could be its own micro front end, its own pipeline, everything separate.
Yeah, and the beauty of it, from my experience, is that once you do that generic interface, mount on mount, bootstrap, it just works for any of them. You don't have to like redo the code each time.
Brilliant. Yeah, really good. So here's a controversial one. Luisa, React or Vue? And a big grin. So someone's trying to stir up trouble here. So your opinion, React or Vue, Luisa? You don't have to answer if you don't want.
I did some research on the differences in between React and Vue. I'm still very confused. No, not confused, but I think at the end of the day, you have to consider Vue is usually simpler to learn. The learning curve is less steep. It does handles optimization, like re-rendering optimization automatically. In React, you have to worry about re-rendering optimization. There is a big job market for React, so you might have more job offers. There is more competitive. It's much more competitive as well. So if you want to, you're starting your career, maybe learning something simpler and having less competition is a good idea. So I think it really, really depends on your requirements. The React community, there is a vast ecosystem of third-party libraries. So, I mean, really, it's two very good frameworks. I don't think there is a best one. It's what works best for you.
So that's it. What works best for you as a dev, what you want to learn based on opportunities, and what works best for the right tool for the right job, for the one you put in place. And we're getting many more suggestions coming through on chat now. We've opened up a can of worms here. I'm going to close it off. And the final question I've got here is, if a common use case involves the user navigating multiple areas of the app, is that a consideration on the load overhead, even with lazy loading? So again, I think this is similar to the question before, but a little bit different. So you're navigating multiple areas of the app. Is it a consideration on the load overhead, even with lazy loading? So does it make it more complex? I guess it does, but not necessarily performance impact. I think similar question to the overhead one before.
Yeah, exactly. Not necessarily performance impacts. Ultimately, you should be vigilant and pay attention to that. But usually you won't have a problem because your micro frontends will be small. So it's just a few megas of your loading. And also then when you're deploying your applications, you'll use a CDN, hopefully, content delivery network. So you'll be caching that. So it's not, you won't be delivering the application directly. So you will have the CDN on front of that to take care of that. So
yes, you can take some of the load off with that as well.
Yeah,
that's great. Well, thank you very much, Luisa. That was a brilliant talk, and I'm sure everyone else will echo that. We'd love to have you back when you found out even more about it. So well done.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, guys.